The Middle Ages was an era filled with conflicts, warriors, and knightly tournaments. During this time, a variety of weapons were developed for use in warfare. Welcome to the Artifacts of Mystery channel. Today, I'll be talking about medieval swords, the most recognizable symbol of the Middle Ages. We'll also look at some myths and truths about swords, explore how medieval swords looked, and how they were used in battle. Let's go. Imagine yourself as a gallant knight or a brave warrior, standing on a battlefield with a gleaming blade in hand. But which sword to choose? Let's delve deeper into single-handed swords, the faithful companions of medieval warriors. Single-handed swords were not just weapons. They were true works of art and engineering marvels of their time. They differed from two-handed swords not only in size, but also in ease of use. These swords, weighing from 1 to 1.5 kilograms, were light enough to be carried in daily life. Just imagine walking through a medieval marketplace with an elegant sword at your hip, ready for action at any moment. Single-handed swords were used with one hand, leaving the other free for a shield or another weapon, such as a dagger. This made the warrior more mobile and protected in battle. Now imagine a fight. In one hand, you have a sturdy sword, and in the other, a reliable shield. You are prepared for any attacks from the enemy, whether it be a sword, an axe, or an arrow from a bow. Single-handed swords came in various shapes and lengths, but they all shared common features: a sharp blade and a sturdy hilt. The most common shape was the straight sword with a double-edged blade. It allowed for both slashing and stabbing attacks, making it a versatile weapon. However, not all single-handed swords were the same. Some had long and narrow blades, designed for piercing armor, while others were wider and intended for powerful slashing blows. The hilts often featured intricate carving, inlay, and even precious stones, especially if the sword belonged to a noble knight. Another important part of the sword was the guard, the crosspiece between the blade and the hilt, which protected the warrior's hand from enemy blows. The guard could be simple or complex in shape, depending on the preferences and status of the owner. Sometimes guards were made of curved horns or even intricate metal designs. Interesting fact: single-handed swords were popular not only among knights, but also among ordinary soldiers. Their relative lightness and versatility made them the ideal choice for any battle. Moreover, training in the use of a single-handed sword was easier and faster than training in the use of two-handed weapons. Thus, single-handed swords were not just weapons, but a true symbol of strength and honor. But there were also two-handed swords, which had a longer blade and required the use of both hands to control. Two-handed swords are the embodiment of power and might on the medieval battlefield. Imagine a sword so large and heavy that it requires both hands to wield. These swords, also known as Zweihander or Grossmesser, weighed on average from 3 to 4.5 kilograms, with blade lengths exceeding 1 meter. Two-handed swords demanded significant physical strength and skill to wield effectively, but in the hands of an experienced warrior, they became deadly weapons. The main advantage of a two-handed sword was its destructive power. Powerful slashing blows could cut through armor or inflict severe injuries. These swords were particularly effective against dense formations of infantry and cavalry, allowing the warrior to hack through rows of enemies. Two-handed swords were also used for breaking enemy shields and weapons. Their immense weight and length allowed for powerful swings with a wide arc, increasing the chances of penetrating the enemy's defenses. However, due to their weight, these swords required significant endurance and skill. Fighting with a two-handed sword was not just physically but also tactically challenging. But it's not true that two-handed swords were merely crude tools of destruction. Many of them were true works of art. Hilts were adorned with carving, inlay, and even precious stones. This made each sword unique and reflected the status of its owner. An interesting fact: two-handed swords were often used for ritual and ceremonial purposes. In the hands of knights and noble warriors, they symbolized strength and authority. At tournaments, such swords could be used in demonstrative performances, showcasing the dexterity and skill of their owners. Thus, two-handed swords were not just weapons, but symbols of power and mastery. They demanded significant physical conditioning and skill, but in the hands of an experienced warrior, they could turn any battle into a spectacle of destruction. Myths and truths about medieval swords. Medieval swords are shrouded in a multitude of myths and legends. Let's debunk the most common ones and find out what was really going on. Myth 1. Swords weighed 10 to 15 kilograms. Truth. The average sword weighed 1 to 3 kilograms. Even the largest two-handed swords rarely exceeded 4 to 5 kilograms. Swords were carefully balanced so that warriors could effectively use them in battle. Myth 2. Knights in armor couldn't stand up without assistance. Truth. Although armor was heavy about 20 to 30 kilograms, it was designed to not restrict the movement of the knight. A well-trained knight could run, jump, and rise from the ground even in full armor. Myth 3. Swords could easily cut through armor. Truth. Cutting through metallic armor with a sword was extremely difficult. Special techniques were used to target vulnerable points in armor, as well as weapons like maces and hammers designed to penetrate armor. Myth 4. All swords were equally effective in battle. Truth. Swords varied in purpose and type of combat. Single-handed swords were versatile and lightweight, while two-handed swords were powerful but required more strength and skill. Short swords and daggers were used for close combat and stealthy attacks. Myth 5. Swords didn't require special care. Truth. Swords needed regular maintenance. They had to be cleaned, sharpened, and lubricated to prevent rust and maintain their sharpness. This was an important aspect of keeping them combat-ready. Myth 6. Swords were used exclusively for battles. Truth. Swords were also symbols of status and were often used for ceremonial purposes. They could be adorned with precious stones and inlay, becoming true works of art. Myth 7. Every warrior had a sword. Truth. Swords were expensive, and not every warrior could afford them. Common soldiers often used spears, axes, and other more affordable weapons. Myth 8. Swords were the main weapon on the battlefield. Truth. Although swords were a popular weapon, they were not the primary weapon on the battlefield. Spears, bows, and crossbows were often the main weapons. Swords were used as secondary weapons and symbols of honor and status. Myth 9. Swords were always carried in scabbards at the waist. Truth. Although swords were often carried in scabbards at the waist, large two-handed swords could be carried on the back or held in hand until the battle began. Swords of the Middle Ages are not only weapons but also symbols of the culture and status of their time. Understanding the myths and truths about them helps to better understand the medieval era and the role that swords played in the lives of people of that time.